Hey folks, class is in session. This is your host, Ashley Stevens, and this show exclusively on Black Enterprise highlights the latest happenings inside HBCU classrooms, the business side of HBCU sports, public policy issues facing these historic institutions, and the overall state of Black higher education. Today's guest is making major moves on Capitol Hill on behalf of HBCUs through UNCF, which is the nation's largest and oldest provider of scholarships to African American students. For the third year running, Mr. Lodriguez Murray, UNCF's Senior Vice President for Public Policy and Government Affairs, has been listed as one of Washingtonian Magazine's most influential people shaping policy. So he's a really big deal, y'all. Today, he's going to tell us about legislation that threatens to bring major funding cuts to HBCUs. Hello, Lodriguez. How are you?
Hello, Ashley. Great to see you again.
Absolutely. Always good to see you as well. Now, listen, tell us a little bit more about what you do at UNCF.
Great. Thank you. So at UNCF, I'm the Senior Vice President for Public Policy and Government Affairs. I lead the division of the organization that represents HBCUs and minority students to Congress and the President. So it's my job to make sure that HBCUs get the most federal funding possible, as well as students of color and students that come from disadvantaged backgrounds. And actually, I have to tell you, it is something that I take extremely seriously, being an HBCU grad myself and being a first-generation college student. As a matter of fact, even a first-generation high school graduate in my direct lineage, and coming from an underserved background, I am the type of student for which we advocate, and so I take it seriously because I speak from a very authentic place.
I like to hear that. First generation, a lot of fronts. You're a very powerful brother in this space. You're an HBCU grad. Where'd you go?
I went to Morehouse College. As a matter of fact, I'm coming up on my 20th year reunion next year, so I'm pretty excited.
Wow. Well, listen, we wouldn't believe that. We thought you just got out of school 5 years ago, Rodriguez.
Sure.
Well, listen, how did you get involved in the public policy space?
Yeah, I've always been interested in government. And so after I graduated Morehouse, I did an internship for my hometown congressman. I'm from Augusta, Georgia, and the congressman at the time is the late Congressman Charlie Norwood. And I interned for him, and he hired me before the end of that summer. And so that began my career on Capitol Hill. And I really learned what to do from that experience. I learned what Congress does each month of the year. And from that TikTok, you learn what you can do to influence it. And then I also had a very unique position with Congressman Norwood, where he had a particular lung ailment where he needed an all-the-time aid. And so I was with him from the beginning of the day until the end of the day. And so I saw every lobbyist and how they interacted with him. I saw what made him pay attention to their needs and their concerns. I saw how he interacted with other members of Congress. I went to the floor every time he went to the floor. I went to every committee meeting he went to. I went overseas when he did. I went back to the district when he did. And so I understand how members of Congress operate, what makes them tick, what they like to hear, what they don't like to hear. And that unique perspective has informed the work that I do with UNCF on Capitol Hill.
That is powerful. I'm glad you got that firsthand on the ground experience. So let's get right into today's discussion. You recently put out an urgent call to action across UNCF's social media platforms. Tell us what's happening in Congress right now.
Great. So right now we're at a very interesting point where HBCU funding is on the line. So not to get too much into the weeds, but this is the time of the year that Congress considers their appropriations bills. So the federal government runs out of money on the last day of September. And Congress has to re-up that money, either doing it short term or doing a full year measure. Now, in doing that, HBCUs are funded. So HBCUs get a significant part of their annual budget from the federal government, and it has to be passed on an annual basis. HBCUs in the House bill are slated for cuts, and we don't know how deep those cuts are because the House bill makes so many cuts across the board to so many different programs that it actually hasn't been released yet. And so we don't know how much jeopardy we're in, but we know we're in jeopardy because eventually the House bill with its massive cuts, it has to be reconciled with the Senate bill. And there has to be a bill that comes from that. And it could be a meeting in the middle. It could be some version of what the House has or the Senate has. But if either of those scenarios are true, and we're either level funded, which basically is a cut year over year, or if we are cut overall, we need HBCU alumni, the students, the faculty and staff, and even those that just care about these institutions, even if you didn't go to one, to get into action and let members of Congress know that we do not want to see cuts in these programs. As a matter of fact, even if you're cutting other things, you should look at investing in HBCUs because of the tremendous value proposition that we provide.
Awesome. Well, that's encouraging to hear, that there's obviously the call to action, but concerning to hear about the proposed cuts. So at present, you're saying it's still a little bit too early to tell how much money is actually on the potential chopping block?
Exactly. Because the House bill is so unpopular and makes so many deep cuts, not just to HBCUs, but to a whole host of other programs and interests, that bill hasn't even been produced publicly yet. So we don't even know the numbers. But we know that full funding is off the table in the House bill. We have to press our friends in the U.S. Senate to do the very best that they can do. But we have to get the grads, the students, and everyone else that holds HBCUs near and dear, and students that come from disadvantaged backgrounds near and dear, to reach out to their member of the House. Everyone has one member of the House of Representatives, and reach out to their 2 U.S. senators and let them know to look strong at the UNCF recommendations and to meet our marks so that we're making sure HBCUs are well taken care of and the students that they serve, which disproportionately come from underserved backgrounds, that they are taken care of. Students that need the most help should get the most help.
Got it. Got it. Got it. Is it too early to say, have HBCU presidents or administrators expressed concerns about this potential legislation?
Absolutely. If the funding numbers for HBCUs are cut, that means that when the institutions open in the fall, there's a level of jeopardy with the amount of funding that they'll receive in the coming months. HBCU presidents are definitely in arms about this, but we have to make sure that we do everything possible to not put the institutions in that position. And so that means calling members of Congress, letting them know what is at stake, and that we're watching. That's one of the real big things that make members of Congress and U.S. senators move into action, to know that their constituency cares about something and that they're watching. And you can't get that point of view across on Instagram, meaning you can't contact members of Congress easily on Instagram. You can't do it really easily on Twitter. You've got to go old school with Congress. Washington, D.C. is an old school town, and you have to pick up the phone and call them or email them. It's one or the other. And you have to make your voice heard so that they see a whole bunch of correspondence coming in on this subject matter. They go into the boss's office and they let him know or her know that, hey, we need to stand up for HBCUs because we have a whole bunch of folks back home that are really interested in these institutions.
Absolutely. And speaking of interest in the institutions, I mean, is there any idea yet what implications this could have for day-to-day operations for HBCUs and how this could impact students both now and in the coming years if these cuts come to pass?
Ashley, that's a great question. It's too early to tell, but what we're trying to do is to prevent that disruption from happening. We look back at last year and there was a massive disruption on our campuses because of the HBCU bomb threats, those that were against how we operate, who we are, simply because of the color of our skin. They targeted our institutions and they provided a massive disruption. We don't want
Right.
another version of that disruption to come to pass. And so that's why it's important that we galvanize all the HBCU alum and all the HBCU interested individuals to get into action, to call their members of Congress. And it's okay if you've never done that before. If you've never called Washington, if you've never called your member of Congress or your U.S. senators, it's okay, because there's so many single issue voters out here in America now. And now it's time for HBCUs to be the single issue that galvanizes many of the folks who still patronize Black enterprise. It's time for us to be galvanized into action about HBCUs and let members of Congress know that we're single issue voters also. And HBCUs and their students, that is our singular issue.
Got it. You're right. I think a lot of Black Enterprise readers and viewers here today would definitely have interest in this issue. Mr. Murray, can you tell us what is the current status of the bill? How quickly is it expected to move?
So it's kind of like two bills on parallel tracks. The House bill that has the massive cuts, it's moved through subcommittee. It hasn't gone to full committee yet. It's kind of halted right there. Then, in addition, you have the Senate bill that funds education. It moved through subcommittee this week and is on its way to full committee. And so both of the bills are making their way through Congress, one through the House, the other through the Senate, with different majorities. Republicans control one, Democrats control the other. What we have to do is not look at either party. We have to make sure that members of Congress in all 50 states know that HBCUs are important, and no matter if you're a Democrat or a Republican, we are holding you equally accountable to ensuring that HBCUs are well funded, no matter what chamber you're in or what party you belong to.
Got it. Got it. Got it. You've shared a lot of helpful tips with us today, Mr. Murray. Tell us also what else is on the radar on Capitol Hill regarding HBCUs? What other issues?
Well, of course, we're working hard to double the Pell Grant. We think that that's one of the best ways to make sure that students that are coming from underserved backgrounds get the hand up and a level playing field to access higher education. Students that have the aptitude should not have finances being the barrier. Another way to state that, Ashley, is the fact that UNCF is such a significant scholarship provider. And so we award some nearly $100 million a year to 10,000 students at 1,100 different colleges and universities. And so that's our way of working with the federal government and all other kind of resources to make sure that our motto is still ringing true, that a mind is a terrible thing to waste, and we don't want any of them to go to waste. In addition to that, we're working hard to revamp resources from the Department of Homeland Security to help protect HBCUs after last year's HBCU bomb threats. We need a national plan of action that helps to fortify the institutions so that that kind of disruption never happens again. In addition to that, there's HBCU funding that we've been talking about, the Strengthening HBCUs grant at the Department of Education. We want to see that fully funded. And in addition to that, we want research infrastructure dollars, brick and mortar construction happening on our campuses that is debt free. We are working hard. We achieved it last year at $50 million. We want to grow that pot and make sure HBCUs are getting more dorms, getting more research facilities on the campuses to respond to all the other societal issues that we've been reading about.
Wow, I want to say congrats on your work in helping secure the 50 million. That's a really big win for HBCUs overall. Does UNCF have other partners that you work with to uplift and kind of support these pillars and support HBCUs in Congress?
Absolutely. We have other organizations with which we work, but it's also important to lift up the members of Congress that really made this happen. Congresswoman Alma Adams from North Carolina, an HBCU grad, Bennett College herself,
Yes.
and has worked at North Carolina A&T and actually a grad of North Carolina A&T and has worked at Bennett College. She's been a really huge partner in this work. And then there's so many other members of Congress in both the House and the Senate and the White House have been strong to work with. And so what we have to do now is our part. We can't put it all on them. We have to pick up the phone, we have to pick up the laptop, the iPad, the iPhone, whatever your Android is, and make sure that we're dialing them up and letting them know that we want to see this money and we want to see everything fully funded. Because in Washington, the old adage is that if you're not seated at the table, then you're on the menu. And so if we're not picking up the phone and calling them and emailing, then somebody else is going to get that money. And then we're going to be at the disadvantage.
Right. If you're not at the table, you're on the menu.
That's
Uh,
right.
that's that's a that's an interesting way to put it. Well, listen, we don't want HBCUs to be on the menu or on the chopping block. So, as Mr. Murray shared with us today, this is a call to action to reach out to your congressional members, your senators, to encourage them to make sure they're doing all they can to preserve this federal funding for HBCUs. Mr. Murray, I appreciate your time today. Tell us where folks can find out more about you, your work, and UNCF.
Well, definitely visit UNCF social channels, but you also want to visit our website, uncf.org. We put out alerts, We let you know what's going on in Washington. We let you know what's going on across the myriad of HBCUs. And we want everyone to stay tuned and work with us to make sure we get the right outcomes, because it's not just solely our job, and the glory won't just be for us. It's up to us, all of us, working together to make sure that HBCUs are fully funded and that our students are made whole.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mr. Murray, for being here with us today on Black Enterprise. He's right. It's all about collective action. So that is it for today's episode. Thank you again to Mr. Lodriguez Murray. Be sure to follow Black Enterprise on all social channels, and also for the latest digital coverage on blackenterprise.com. This is your host, Ashley Stevens. Class is dismissed.